Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to today's Audit and Governance Committee meeting. With everybody's here, no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest? No, none. So this is a Zoom meeting, it's being recorded. We'll use the hand signals, and when I don't notice it, somebody will draw it to my attention. I'll do my best. It is also the last meeting of this municipal year. So I'll go on to my announcements. Not only is it the last meeting of the municipal year, but we're also in a PERDA period prior to the elections. So we just need to keep that in mind as we go through the business today. I've got an update on account deadlines. The accounts will now be on, the publication dates for the accounts are now the 31st of May, were the 31st of May, but it's now been agreed that it's the 31st of July for the draft, the 30th of September for the final report. At our last meeting, we had a long discussion on the item in the insurance framework regarding the openness of the business board and our feeling and our recommendation that that should move from a presumption of closure unless decided to be open to a presumption of open unless decided to be closed. And I can report back that that was accepted by the Combined Authority Board and has been referred back to they have referred it to the business board for their consideration. And the last item for my announcements is just to put on record that in line with best practice, members of the audit committee met with the external and internal auditors prior to this meeting. This was a private discussion, and I can report that, or I can say that there was nothing material to report that came out of that discussion. So moving on to item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments, or are we happy to accept them as a record? Right, we take them as a record. Are there any matters arising that members wish to raise? Nick?
Yeah, I put my hand up for the first part actually, because if you look at 4.8, it does capture all that the committee decided, but the phraseology is a bit odd and doesn't really make sense. It says the Audit and Governance Committee discussed that they would like to recommend, so it just needs slightly tweaking, I think.
In what respect?
But if you just read it the way it says, the Audit and Governance Committee discussed that they would like to.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Recommended. Decided, I think.
Yeah.
If we could make that amendment, that would be lovely. Thank you, Nick. Okay, well, if we could just go to the action list then, please, before we close this item, which is on page 10 of 191. Are there any comments on that action list? There's a progress note against each item. Are we happy to take that as agreed? Yes, okay, thank you. Right, Kim, we now move on to the item 4, which is the Combined Authority update. Kim, are you able to bring to light the end of the municipal year?
I am, thank you, Chair. And as you have said, Chair, we are now in the pre-election period. So as you might imagine, the last meeting of the board before we went into the pre-election period was fairly busy, and it was quite a heavy agenda. And the meeting was therefore taken in two parts, and it was taken in two parts because some of the items had to be adjourned. There simply wasn't time to deal with all of the items on the day specified in the agenda. And as a result of that, some of the members have asked us to conduct a review of our business, how we conduct our business, to see if there is a better and more efficient way of conducting combined authority business. So the timing of the meetings and the length and duration of meetings is under review. And that governance review will start after the elections. And that will have some constitutional impacts, which is why I mention it, because it will become relevant for this committee as to what the board decide, or how the board decide they want to conduct their business in future. And you may have also seen, Chair, that there was an announcement from MHCLG about remote meetings finishing. So after the 6th of May, there will be no further remote meetings, and physical meetings will be required. And so as we get underway and prepare for the new meeting, the first new meeting of the civic year, which is on the 2nd of June, we are looking at how we prepare for those physical meetings. But there will at the same time be some consultation on amendments to the regulations, which look at whether, I suppose, whether to reinstate remote meetings for the future. But at the present time, we are all preparing for some physical meetings, or looking at ways in which we can deal with our business differently to limit the amount of time spent in those physical meetings. Secondly, on another governance issue, the local assurance framework was discussed. Sorry, Chair, I noticed that Councillor Brown has his hand up, and I wondered if you wanted to take questions as we go along, or whether you prefer questions at the end. You're on mute, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm out of practice. Shall we take them as we go?
Okay.
David Brown.
Hey, Chairman. Thanks, Kim. I just wondered if you'd heard anything about the legal challenge being taken by, I think it's Hertfordshire County Council, to say remote meetings can continue.
I'm not up to date with that. I'm aware of the legal challenge, Councillor Brown, because I think it was started through the Lawyers in Local Government group decided to take the challenge forward. But Robert may be more au fait with where that is. I'm not sure if they've got a hearing date yet.
Chair, through you, I'm rapidly trying to call it up on the screen to get a specific date, but I'm aware that there is a date. Could I come back a little later in this, so that I can give you a little more detail, Chair?
Kim, please. I'll keep a better eye out for hands up now.
Okay, thank you. And then the next item of significance for this committee is the local assurance framework. And as you said, Chair, there was a recommendation made to the combined authority for public meetings, and that resulted, that has been the subject of some extensive discussion we heard from the chair of the business board at previous meetings about whether they hold their meetings in private or public. And the referral was made by the combined authority board that the business board should be invited to reconsider previous their current working and their current operation, and have more meetings in public. And so when the business board consider that, I think it might be wise, Chair, for you to consider inviting the chair of the business board to come to this meeting to discuss what the subject of their discussion and the matters that they considered at the business board when deciding whether to hold meetings in public or private. I think that was useful because I think the chair did make some very pertinent comments into the business board, which of course this committee will perhaps not be aware of at this stage. But that has to be seen in the context also of an ongoing LEP review, which I mentioned in my last update to this committee. So that was announced in the budget. There is an ongoing review of the LEP, which will affect the business board and how that operates in future. So I think all of those need to be seen, all of those issues need to be seen in the round. And then also sorry, Chair.
So do we need to programme that in, or is it a timing issue after they've formally considered the recommendation?
I think, Chair, I will speak to the chair of the business board. If you would like me to do that, I will speak to the chair of the business board about attending a future meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, and then let you know when that discussion happens at business board. and then to follow on to a future meeting.
Yeah, I think that would be good if we could put that in the action list, because I think it's important that if there's a reluctance to consider the recommendation or take on board the recommendation, I think the opportunity for discussion between the members and the chair of the business board would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we had also a revision to our financial strategies. That's the capital strategy, treasury management, investment strategy, and the MRP statement. And of course, there were some recommendations made by this committee to the Combined Authority Board, which were incorporated into those strategies, which went to the board and were approved. So those are the areas I think which really touch upon matters for this committee. So in relation to other ongoing issues, the board had some really key matters coming to its last meeting. The first was a CAM progress report. And as we saw, we heard that they started a design concept process to look at whether we had the most up-to-date vehicle and technology for a new passenger transport system. And those designs were out just before the board met. So they considered those and noted those new vehicle and system designs. There was also a decision to get the business case underway and appointment of staff to OneCam Limited. So we can see that work on the OneCam will really start to accelerate from this point onwards, now that we have a decision made on what that system could look like going forward. And I think probably one of the most important points, and the reason I mention the CAM update in particular, is that this board has raised in the past that it would like to see further extensions to the network in the future. And the Mayor has promised to meet with members to discuss that. And he did say he would do that post-election. But he did take the opportunity to ask us to consider whether we could have extensions to both Chatteris and Peterborough on the network map, which were made possible by the outcome of those design concepts. And so they were put in as potential provisional routes, which we can now take forward into the consideration as we move forward and look at the business case going
There's
forward.
a hand up from Mike Davey, if we could take that as we go through.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kim. I think it's for audit and governance, but it could be for scrutiny, so do correct me if I've got it the wrong way around. It was about in relation to the appointments for the senior executives for the OneCam board. A significant amount of their pay is related to performance-rated pay, and it would be very helpful to see the criteria on which that will be judged, because whilst obviously it's important to give them the freedom to get on with their job and they should be rewarded appropriately, it is quite a lot of money, and I think it would be worthwhile just having a look, I think. But whether that's for here or whether it's for scrutiny, I think it's probably better placed for here, if I'm honest. But I'll seek Robert's advice and others as to whether that's correct or not. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. And I would say in relation to that, Councillor Davey, that there was a question to the board from the scrutiny committee about the pay and how the pay was settled on. And so there is a question and answer session there. I'm not quite sure where the relevant, I mean, it was the pay was looked at and compared to market rates for these types of jobs, and the people who were applying are actually taking a step down or receiving a very similar pay to what is being offered for OneCam Limited. But I think that is, we'll have a think about where that comes in future. Obviously, you'll have an opportunity to look at what the combined authority is authorising as the shareholder and the sole shareholder of OneCam Limited through the accounts. So that will be an opportunity to look at that here. But we'll have a further thought, I think, unless, Robert, you want to add anything now.
Chair, no, I think absolutely, as Kim says, it's important for us to think about where to place these things. The Combined Authority Board operates, as it were, a scrutinising role over the activities of OneCam as the shareholder. But of course, committees such as this one and scrutiny have a role as well. And looking at this committee, it's obviously interested in the sort of global picture of the arrangements in place. And as Kim says, looking over the finances, but that's at a slightly higher level. So we are aware of the need to develop processes so that we can plug in to this committee and scrutiny an effective way of overseeing the board's activity in relation to its company. So that's something that, as Kim says, we're going to be working on.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I could just respond very briefly.
Sorry?
I just wondering if I could just come back very briefly, Chair.
Yeah.
It's grateful for the reassurance, Kim and Robert, about the salary. It's more the performance-related pay, the criteria, that I think I welcome clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Nick Sanford.
Yeah, it's also a point on the CAM, really, Kim. You mentioned the possibility of including Peterborough in the plans. There's a considerable amount of support in Peterborough for the idea of some form of mass rapid transit, and so I think if the combined authority wants to keep people in Peterborough supportive of the proposals, I think that it wouldn't really look very good if the largest city in the combined authority were to be excluded from the proposal. So if that point could be borne in mind.
Thank you.
Okay, and then moving on, so other items of significance that were on the agenda. So we had the Climate Change Commission report, which is a significant piece of work, and a number of recommendations were made to the combined authority. As this report was released only shortly before the board met, recommendation was made to the combined authority board that we ought to take those recommendations away, look at them in more detail, and come back with a response to those proposals to a later meeting. And work is now underway to look at developing that report, and in order to assist us to do that, there has been a climate change working group which will be set up. I don't have the details of that yet. That is also something which the team is working on, but essentially that will bring a lot of interested parties together to look at how they are going to not only respond to the report, but then deliver on any of the recommendations that come out of the report. So that work is also underway. We are at very, very early stages of that. But given the interest you've expressed in the past about climate change issues, we will, of course, can of course monitor some of that through this group also as we move forward through this committee.
And in fact, we've got a further report programmed in for the June meeting.
Yeah. Councillor Sanford has
a hand up. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, just thinking about the Climate Change Commission. And obviously, it's the function of this committee to look more at the process. Having seen their actual interim report, the thing I wasn't clear about, and I don't think it was covered in the report in any great detail, was how the commission had actually used the results of their consultation to actually feed into their conclusions. So maybe that's something we need to talk about when we discuss it on a future occasion.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, thank you. And then on transport issues, there were a number of transport issues on the combined authority agenda, but one matter that wasn't on the agenda but has happened is the transferring of the transport teams from the County Council and Peterborough City Council, and that took effect on the 1st of April. So the combined authority will be delivering its passenger transport obligations directly to the public in future. And other significant matters, despite although there were a number of issues dealing with budget support for various transport projects, items of note really are that we have to get a new transport modelling system underway. And so there was a significant amount of spend to look at starting a new transport modelling system. We are also going to refresh the local transport plan because although the transport plan is fairly new, as a new body, we're responding to a lot of changes in transport legislation, not least of which is the potential for franchising to come forward. And so a refresh will begin of the local transport plan. And we also had approval of the England's Economic Heartlands transport strategy. And the reason this is important is because it feeds into the Oxcam ARC work that's going on. So the transport strategy by England's Economic Heartlands will could help shape some of the spatial planning that's going on across the Oxford to Cambridge ARC. So some useful information there.
Thank you very much, Kim. Graham Bull.
Chairman, just a point of clarification, Kim. When we at the district councils consider planning applications, we always receive transport advice from the county council. Does that mean now that the transport advice will come from the CPCA?
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Very, very good question, actually, and one that we have been asking ourselves. But no, it appears that transport information will still be coming from the county council. And the reason for that is that the county council retain their status as the highways authority. So it's their job to actually look at what's happening on the ground. We're about passenger transport movements, so it's very closely related. But actually, under the planning legislation, it's the Highways Authority who respond in. Although it is something we are having a look at, and to see whether the CPCA as the Transport Authority ought to be playing a more active role in planning applications and looking at the future transport needs of our area.
Thank you. Yes, if I may come back, Chairman. It's important that you and the county work together then as the Highways Authority, because we don't want duplication. Equally, we don't want gaps.
Yeah, perfectly correct, Councillor Ball. You're spot on there.
Okay, thank you.
So I think outside of the transport matters, then the key significant issue on the agenda was the affordable housing programme, and that did generate that took up an awful lot of the agenda time. But the board did eventually accept the revised proposals put forward by MHCLG for the affordable housing programme. And there will be a future board report to follow in relation to that once we have had those discussions and understand from MHCLG what the detail of that new revised programme is. For those of you who aren't aware of the conditions that they have currently laid down, these are that we had created a revolving fund from the funding that we'd received from government, and that revolving fund is out on loan at the moment, and they've asked that we, when the loans come back in, all of that funding is ploughed back into grant funding. Value for money was pegged at 45, an upper limit of 45,000 a unit, that we have to agree all future approvals with MHCLG, and that we are working with them on what the future monitoring arrangements are going to be. And then finally, we ceased our agency for Cambridge City Council, and all funding will be paid directly to them in future, as well as some outstanding funding that we currently hold for the City Council. So that was in effect the housing programme. Then we had the local other matters, really.
Mike Davey wants to comment on the housing programme.
Thank you, Chair. And I do recognise the general caution about PERDA. I'm just wondering on an audit front where we should fit into the housing decisions. Because clearly it's not quite gone according to plan. I think that would probably be fair to say. And therefore, as an audit committee, it might be worthwhile us having a look at it. And rather than going through the process later in the meeting, I just wonder if it might be worth just identifying what the advice would be about how we pick this up in the audit committee at a later date. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, there's an opportunity when we look at the programme for next year's work. Perhaps we should leave it there.
Happy to follow your advice, Chair. Happy to follow your advice.
Thank you.
Kim? Sorry, Councillor Goldsack has his hand up.
Oh, right, sorry, I missed that, yeah.
Chair, I didn't think I had to say this at the start of the meeting, but because Mike has just brought that point up, I'd like it noted that I am on the Housing Committee as well as being on the Audit Committee. So if you were going to go into any discussion and debate there about that, that was that would have put me in an awkward position.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark.
Forgive me, Chair. I should have. Mark has reminded me. I was substituting at the last Housing Committee, so I probably also need to mention that I was at that meeting, but I thought it was there as a substitute. So thank you, Mark, for reminding me. Cheers.
David Brown.
Chairman, can we really leave this to a future work programme? I think it's totally inappropriate to be discussing any of it today when we're in Purda.
Okay, I think that's very appropriate advice, and let's leave it to the next meeting on the Purda grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then just a couple of other items to pick up from the agenda. We had the local economic recovery strategy refresh there, and that was approved along with some proposals for the Market Towns master planning. So there is therefore ongoing work to help and assist the economic recovery in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We also retained the Energy Hub. So there was a decision by the Combined Authority last year to look at divesting itself of the Energy Hub. And there were some discussions about whether that ought to, the new home for the Energy Hub ought to be. But we have subsequently decided to retain our accountable body status for the Energy Hub. For those of you who are not aware, the Energy Hub covers a large number of authorities in the southeast of England, and it's responsible for looking at ways of improving it contributes towards the climate change agenda, and it looks at ways at improving energy use across our area, and it receives grants from government, which it then has to independently assess and issue grants, and we are the accountable body for that group. So we have decided to retain our status as accountable body. And then finally, the only thing I think of note, particular note on the agenda, was that Scrutiny have decided or have asked the board if they could review their arrangement following a recent report by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and the board decided that it would support that request from Scrutiny. So that review is going to begin in the new civic year, and of course that may have some implications for the way in which this committee also does its business, because I know, Chair, you've had quite a close working relationship with the Chair of Scrutiny in the past to look at ensuring that you have clearly defined lines between you as to who is dealing with what. So I'm sure you'll want to keep an overview of what's happening with that review of the scrutiny arrangements. So that's essentially it, Chair. I'm happy to take any further questions, or if there's anything else you'd like to ask about, which I haven't particularly mentioned here, I'm happy to take any questions in relation to this.
I don't see any hands up. Before we close this item, could you just, this review of scrutiny, overview and scrutiny, is this a formally constituted exercise? Because if it is, I think consultation with me would be necessary to be put in their terms of reference.
Yes, perhaps I can hand over to Robert, Chair, for that.
Chair, absolutely. We can formulate it. In fact, I've got a meeting later on today just to settle the specific terms of reference. But it would clearly, to my mind, add great value to that process for you to be involved. And what we'll do is we'll revert to you with some suggestions as to how that will be, if that's satisfactory.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Kim, thank you very much for that very thorough description of what's a busy end to the civic year, and also for taking the questions on the hoof as we went through. I'm glad we took them as we went through, otherwise we'd have quite a pile to deal with at this stage. Okay, thank you. Don't see any other comments. Very grateful. So I'd now like to move on to item 5, which is a amendment to the Constitution. Robert Parkin to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. And after I've done this, or before, if you prefer, I can give a response to the question about the challenge, the legal challenge. Would you like me to deal with that first?
Yes, please. Yes.
So just very quickly, members, Chair and members, what we know at the moment is ADSO and the Lawyers and Local Government, along with Hertfordshire County Council, did receive permission to what's called expedite their claim for a declaration in the High Court as to the lawfulness of continuing to hold meetings virtually following the ending of the regulations that we're at the moment ostensibly relying on. They end, as we know, on the 6th of May. The High Court has given approval for that to proceed. There was a hearing on the 23rd of March at which the court issued directions for the matter to proceed with a timeline which will ensure the case will be decided before the end of April. So we will hopefully have some clarity then, members, but at the moment we don't have an indication of anything more than that. I hope that assists at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, Chair, moving on to the item. So this is an amendment to the Constitution. The Combined Authority Constitution provides myself as monitoring officer with delegated powers to make amendments to the Constitution where that's in consequence to a legislative requirement or a minor variation, a non-substantive variation in nature, or to keep it up to date with the law and removing inconsistency and ambiguity. This amendment is as to the removal of reference to non-constituent authorities, and we identified that the reference is as it were, a read over or a stray reference that's to arrangements that are legally in place as a result of the orders that constitute other combined authorities, in particular the West Midlands Combined Authority and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, wherein they are able to bring in, co-opt in, invite as invitees to the combined authority the members who are members of contiguous local authorities, that is, local authorities that are actually outside the footprint of their combined authority areas. There's no such power in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough context, so that what we're doing is issuing a corrective to that by making an amendment. Hopefully that's very straightforward. I did helpfully receive from Councillor Brown a couple of minor but important comments on the drafting of the amendment, which I'm happy to take up further. But if members have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Chair.
Thank you. Don't see any hands up. I mean, my only was in my mind when we discussed this previously that we did agree at our last meeting that we'd store material changes to proposals to the Constitution until our annual review. But this is a sort of tidying up for the record proposal, which I'm comfortable with, and we are asked as a committee to note these changes. Are we happy to do that, as I don't see any questions? Okay, we've noted the changes. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Chair.
That brings us on to item 6, which is the corporate risk report, which is really in two parts. It's the register as it stands and changes to the strategy, many of coming out of the internal audit review of risk, which gave a partial assurance. And I'm sure as we go through this, we'll get insight as to whether the recommendations made by the internal auditors have now been implemented. And also we have the thorny question of continuing to find a way into presenting all of this complicated information in a legible and meaningful format. And I know that's as much a challenge for the officers as it is for us on the audit committee. So when we get to that stage, informally a format proposal was also shared with members. I'd be very grateful for insights, or I know officers too would be grateful on feedback on how we think we're getting on in producing a way of reporting which meets our needs. So with that big introduction, Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and members. So just turning back to our, of course, our departure point for this item, which is our terms of reference as a committee, and as you know, Chair and members, one of the roles of the committee is to review and assess the authority's risk management and internal control and corporate governance arrangements, and so we bring you the risk register as part of that. To give you an insight into current risks, but also very importantly the arrangements that are in place. Clearly, your assurance as to those arrangements will have regard to the content of that register. But it may be that the detailed content, as it were, falls to be assessed and examined in different contexts. A challenge we've had, as the chair indicates, is trying to present this to you, and I'll take you through some of the different ways we're doing that, and also ask Sue to share to the screen the latest innovation. What I'd like to do, Chair, is first of all ask that, if I can, Fran Houston talks to the committee about updates to the risk management strategy that were affected following RSM's report, and she hopefully will be able to fairly swiftly just talk through the committee to the changes that are being proposed to be made to the strategy. Chair, with your agreement, could I ask Fran to talk?
Yep, of course, and welcome, Fran. We look forward to it.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, members. Yeah, so as Rob mentioned, we recently had the RSM audit, which came across with 8 different management actions for us to improve on our risk management processes within the CPCA. A part of those management actions were part of the relationship between risk and change control document that yourself saw in November. And that covered that aspect in terms of risk. So the idea being is that we've then got that separate document and this document, and now they are hopefully flowing together and they benefit both documents. So 2.2 of the report mentions the biggest changes that have been made, and 4Es as part of one of the appendices that went out with the proposed changes. They've all been highlighted yellow for you're aware of which bits have been updated. So this makes reference to the Orange Book, which is the government's risk management approach, provides additional clarity on the monitoring arrangements, and also, like I said, reinforces that risk appetite and risk tolerance, which was in the relationship between risk and change control document. And it also enhances the processes of escalation, de-escalation, and further monitoring and review arrangements that we're looking to embed within the CPCA. So they're the biggest changes. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Nick Sanford.
Yeah, I'm looking at Appendix 4, which has got the revised version of the strategy with the bits highlighted. Yeah. At the bottom of page 4, there's a couple of typos, I think, because it says in the final line, it says transparency over principal risk phase, and how these are, I presume that should be how these are managed. So could you just review that paragraph?
Yeah, that's fine, I can do that.
Thank you, Nick. Internal audit, do you have any comments on this approach, and has it resolved the observations you found in your audit?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, certainly from my initial review, yes, it's addressed a number of those. I would just mention that this week we're actually starting the formal follow-up audit of the findings and the management actions that were agreed. So actually we will come back to your next meeting with a bit more of a formal update and assessment from our perspective as to whether or not all of those actions have been fully implemented. So, you know, if I may, it may be more appropriate to give you a more sort of fuller copy at your next meeting. But certainly from, I looked through the bits that Francesca had highlighted in yellow, and I could resonate and see a number of the improvements had been made that were agreed through our report.
Okay, thank you very much. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just one that made me smile when I read through it. It's on page, no, we've got page 89 of 188. It's table 4, risk events and responses. It's the middle one. New server doesn't arrive in time. Purchase 2 as a spare. Seems a rather pointless buying 2 from the same person if they're going to deliver late. All you end up with is 2 late servers. I wouldn't have suggested that's a really good contingency action.
Okay, thank you. I had a comment on, well, how are we doing this? Page 10 of the report. I've got 85 of 191 on my screen. And this talks about the review of risk registers and will be given an internal audit every quarter. It struck me as one of the thrusts of the internal audit report was, well, you might have a scheme, but how do you know it's been used? I mean, I've been in organisations where putting it on the risk register was considered to be the action rather than managing the risk. And it says there will be an internal audit every quarter. How will that be done? Who will do that? Because I wasn't sure with the language we meant our internal audit colleagues or whether this was management action within the organisation.
So this is for a management action within the CPCA. So that will sit within our monitoring and governance team.
Okay. Just to avoid then any ambiguity, perhaps you could just insert the management action internal, so that we're clear. But it is absolutely vital that the strategy is turned into action, and that's not easy to do necessarily. So I'm very pleased to see that will be that there was evidence now that was being pursued. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more hands up, so thank you very much, Francesca. That's the policy bit. Robert, you wanted to talk about the report now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, moving on to the risk register itself, it's populated by reference to individual project risk assessments and overarching corporate risks. It's reviewed by the corporate management team, where we discuss risks that are new and changes to risks, including mitigation that are occurring between meetings. We apply the same approach out into the directorates as well. So moving on, obviously you've got the rather large document itself, and we've tried to present this in a couple of different ways. Firstly, Chair, you're keen to understand the 3 top risks. If members, Chair, and yourself look at the heat map, you'll see that that in the red zone, there are 3 risks that are highlighted as being the highest in level, and that's item 1, which is our dependence on external partners to deliver the agenda through projects of the combined authority. That's highlighted as red. And then the other 2 risks are still relating to the implications, future and current of the pandemic. Other significant items we wanted to draw your attention to were changes, and they are set out on the face of the report under significant implications. Risk 20, which is actually closely associated with risk 7, and that's about the consequences or the potential consequences of a new trade deal with the European Union and how that may impact on the delivery programme. The next item is making reference to the MHCLG review of the housing programme, and we have a reference to the absence of funding for historic, ambitious and long-stalled programmes again. And finally is a new item which is around the capacity and resilience of the ICT provision to the CPCA, which is a new item as well. What I'd just ask, if I can, Chair, before wrapping up and taking any questions, is if Sue Hall could share the the latest innovation that we thought may help on presentation, and that's a dashboard. So that's trying to indicate. Essentially, you'll see at the bottom there. There's a table that's got the risks listed and whether they've moved up or down or remain the same. And then we've got the comparison as between the risks last time and where they may have shifted. So again, welcome feedback on the approach to presenting this and any questions as well. Where you'll see in the report as well, there's a table at the bottom which is trying to indicate changes as well. So we're trying to sort of present what is a very big document and inevitably lots of detail for you in ways that highlight to you what changes there may be, and hopefully that will assist you in your role of considering the arrangements we have in place around risk. I'm happy to take any. I'll try to respond to any questions, Chair.
I can't see any hands up, but that might be because of the layout of the screen. So shout if anybody's got anything to say. I have a question about sorry, David.
Yeah, just Robert, on what we're looking at the screen now. I get the pie charts. I quite like those. I get the one on the bottom on the left hand, but that one on the top left hand corner is just too wordy for me. There's too many words in it. I can't read it all. It could do with the wording either really tightened up or cross-reference to the number of the risk or something.
Chair, Chair, can I come in, John? I don't.
Yes, please do, Mike.
I would agree with David. I think if you've got the numbers on the table at the bottom left, the numbers just go into I like the heat map, but just the numbers in the heat map so you can cross-reference them, if that's okay. That would be so I would agree. Sorry, a long-winded way of saying I agree with David.
Any other comments on this? The latest bit that's on the screen. The two comments colleagues have made were exactly mine. I didn't really understand the heat map. So one bit of me said is if we take the diagrams that are already there, the heat maps in the paper, do we need that heat map, or are the pie chart or the list of things enough? I don't know, but whatever, I think it's worth giving it a go from my sense, but solving that bit with the risk heat map maybe there's a way of integrating. But I think what we should be encouraged by is that this never-ending journey of trying to get the information in a form which takes the mind to what is going on and the ability to ask questions and seeing the dynamics that you're now producing in the report. It's very much a positive step, and I look forward to trying to bring it into it when we next look at it next time. Can we stop screen sharing now? That's better. Now I can see everybody. I don't see any hands up, but I can see everybody. What we're asked to do is review the register, review the proposed corporate management strategy and recommend any proposed changes to the corporate risk register to be reported to the next combined authority board. I haven't heard anything from members saying that they want to make changes to the risk register per se. Does anybody feel that there are changes that we'd like to recommend? Mike Davey. Mike, you're on mute. There we go.
That's first of the day. Sorry, forgive me. It's not so much regarding change. It's more just a question. I mean, with regards to the one about the pandemic and the implications for staff, we're kind of a year in now, and I just wondered if we've learned enough to know whether this is and how the implications are for the organisation, or is it just too early to think about changing it to bearing in mind the mitigations that are already in place? So I suspect it's probably a question for Kim or Robert.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I suppose like most organisations, we are just now turning our attention to, what the future of working life is going to be for the Combined Authority and for every other organisation out there. We have the added issue of having to actually find some new premises as well, because we, as you know, we sold our office accommodation in March of last year. So we have been, we were planning a period of working from home in any event. I think as an organisation, we've always been quite fleet of foot anyway. We had a fairly agile working policy before we went into lockdown, which made our transition through lockdown actually probably quite simple, really, because we were all ready, geared up with our IT systems, etc., to be able to adapt. But I think we are very much turning our mind to the future of what this is going to look like, and a confirmation that we now are moving to physical meetings, I think, is going to solidify some of our future working arrangements. So I don't have an answer yet, Councillor David, but you're right, it's something that we are seeking to address now.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any more. Sorry, Chair, I was just going to confirm I didn't have anything to add on top of that.
Okay, thank you. So we've reviewed the risk register and the risk management strategy, and we made some recommendations for just adjusting the risk management strategy amendments. And we don't have any recommendations at this stage to make to the Combined Authority on changes to the risk register itself. So we look forward to seeing it next time, and the continuing evolution of the way it's presented, as we've discussed. Thank you. Okay, we now go to item 7, which is the internal audit update report, which I think John is going to introduce before handing over to our internal audit colleagues.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so this paper introduces 2 reports that have been provided by RSM for the committee to consider. Firstly is an update to the work that RSM have been conducting against the plan for 2020-21, and secondly to consider the draft internal audit plan for the new financial year 2021-22, which has been developed following the internal audit strategy, which was approved by the committee in November last year, but also following discussions with members of the corporate management team. And as you're aware, Dan Harris from RSM is here to present the papers. So if I can hand over to Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, Chair, for the introduction. So I'm going to try and just ensure that I signpost correctly. What I'll do is I'll refer to the page number that sits at the bottom of each of the pages. So section 1 of the progress report, which is headed up key messages, and is page 105 of 188. Just spend a little bit more time perhaps than I would ordinarily on the progress report, given that we are obviously at the end of the financial year now, but you've not got obviously we were sort of appointed mid-year, so, and we didn't formally approve the strategy until November, but nonetheless we have had some movement in the last quarter on some of the reviews that you'd already agreed. So 2 reviews, as we've stated there, have been issued in draft since the last meeting. I have also reviewed the draft report for the key financial control review. I've just got some comments that I'm waiting for my colleagues to come back to me on. I reviewed that at the end of last week. So a draft report should be issued later today or tomorrow on that review. You can see I've referenced some changes to the plan. So if we go on to the next page on 106, that obviously just provides a full update on a page in terms of where we are with the remaining reviews. And there's 2, as you can see on there, ongoing. And 2 further reviews that are scheduled to be undertaken in April. And the following page, Appendix B, just brings that to life a little bit in terms of some of the changes since the last meeting that we're just signposting to the committee. So, I mean, I won't talk through all of those. You'll have obviously seen them, but what we have had, I think the other thing that I sort of haven't stated within the paper, we have had perhaps some further delays to the IT audit in terms of getting access to certain information from the third-party provider. And John has, we're grateful for John's help in sort of trying to get that information, but we're yet to receive that, so we can't yet conclude that review. But we're still in dialogue trying to get evidence that we need to bring that IT controls assessment review to a conclusion. You will note that the one audit that I should mention is the deferral that we're seeking approval for today of the climate change review, and to enable me to have enough work to provide an opinion for 2021, we've put in an additional review on the COVID-19 capital grants review. So that review was specifically brought forward, and as I say, is ongoing. So that in part explains why, because I think that initially the climate change review was due to be undertaken in the middle of February. So that sort of explains in part why there would have been another final report on your meeting today. But that review has actually been requested by officers to be deferred to a future year's programme, and hence we brought forward another grant audit into the year that hasn't commenced as yet.
Could we just pause there, Daniel?
Yes.
Got a hand up for Mark Gilsack.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is just a point I want to raise when I was reading through the documents. Appendix A on 106. I just thought it was hellishly coincidental that everything went to the end of June. Everything. You know, is there? You know, it made me question, well, what are we doing during April and May? You know, it just seemed, I don't know. Can you further explain that, please?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. Yes, sorry, Councillor. I think there is a logical explanation insofar as we were just looking forward to the next meeting of this committee where all of these final reports would be presented to. So we fully anticipate finalising a number of those reports before June, but what that is trying to say is that sort of column's headed up the target audit committee. So we're just saying now, realistically, we won't bring a final report to anything other than your June committee meeting.
David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Dan. Just building on from what Councillor Golsack's just said, really. You know, we were expecting these reports at this meeting. We're now pushing them back to June. Is there something underlying that, pushing these back? You know, are you getting everything back on time that you need to get the reports? Was it just, were they timetabled wrong in the first place, or what really? Why are we pushing everything back to June?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 or 4 different reasons. So one of the reasons was that the plan, understandably, because we weren't appointed until halfway through the year, and because we didn't get a full plan for 2021 approved until your November meeting, by necessity, I think with the exception of the risk management review, everything else had a timing of Q4 delivery. So clearly that's ordinarily, we wouldn't ordinarily time all pretty much 90% of our audit plan to be delivered in one quarter. I think that's sort of obvious. I suspect that's had a knock-on impact for officers in terms of the amount of information we have been requesting in Q4. I think the other thing that the team have just come up against, I know a number of officers have been taking annual leave, which may well have been pushed back due to COVID in February and March. So that has impacted, I believe, some of the information requests that we have made, and perhaps getting that information as timely as we would have liked to ensure that we delivered some more final reports to your April meeting today. So I think in summary, this should be a one-off year whereby we were only appointed at the mid-year point. It wasn't until November your plan was approved, and therefore by necessity, almost a year's worth of work was delivered in one quarter. Next year's programme should have a lot more smoother profiling of our work throughout the year to ensure that you get a regular flow of reports throughout your meeting cycle.
Thank you. It looks like June's going to be a busy meeting, Chairman.
Is Graham Bull?
Thank you, Chairman. Through you, I wanted to ask Dan about the IT audit, because as I understand it, 3Cs supply IT services to the Combined Authority, and HDC is responsible for 3Cs, and we have an audit programme run through an outside provider for 3Cs. I just wondered, Dan, are you able to liaise with our auditors, and are you placing reliance on their work? Or is this just you mentioned delays? Are there problems with the management of 3Cs in responding to you? I get reports from our auditors on 3Cs, and I just want to make sure that we don't have gaps that we're falling into.
Yes, I mean, thank you, Councillor. This is one of the reviews. I mean, this review commenced the middle of February, and I do have email trails just giving me a bit of a timeline of sort of version of events of when we've requested information, and then we've escalated this to John Alsop internally within the Combined Authority, with a view to sort of John trying to get access to the information that is required. So I know that perhaps doesn't fully answer your questions. What we certainly haven't had is any pushback from the provider to say, here's a suite of all of the reviews that have been undertaken on behalf of the District Council. So that I don't believe that it's felt that there's a duplication of the sort of the scope and the focus of our work. But we are still very much, I believe, waiting on some information from 3Cs to be able to conclude our review. And John, as I say, has been assisting us with that. John, I'm not sure if there's any sort of latest update on that.
No, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Councillor Bull. Yes, we have been trying to get information from 3C on behalf of RSM. I think perhaps one of the issues that we've got is that, as you recall, when 3C were initially engaged to provide us with IT support, the Combined Authority was a very different organisation. It was much smaller than it currently is. So the resource that 3C have put to providing support to the Combined Authority was based on the initial requirements. Now that our organisation has grown and grown, we do need to consider how the support, the IT support is going forward. And that might be a reason why they haven't been able to provide the resources that we need them to up until now. So there is a parallel piece of work going on to review our IT requirements going forward. So hopefully it will be easier going forward.
Chair, could I just offer an additional commentary on that? So you may see at the bottom of the risk register, there's a new item that looks to really identify our, the point that we clearly depend on ICT in order to function. and that where we recognise that there's a risk in that falling down. As John says, the organisation's grown quite rapidly, so we need a scalable solution. I think it's certainly acknowledged that those involved on the ground have been working very hard, and for three Cs, there's been some people who've played a blinder, as it were, in the last year in particular. But what we're doing to deal with the risk around IT provision is review our future needs and our future service model, and we've actually, on an officer basis, because of the value of the contract, agreed to commission Soccertim, who members may know are a specialist IT provider in the sector, to carry out a needs assessment and advise us on a future model. And it may be that we can develop the working relationship with 3Cs. I think in terms of 3C's engagement and with the audit process, obviously it may be that the report identifies some ways in which perhaps we haven't been given information. But of course, I'm sure Dan at RSM would want to just give time for that to be wrapped up completely, rather than offer any sort of commentary at this stage in full. If I'm sorry, Dan, maybe going a little bit too far, but Chair, hopefully that little bit more commentary help.
Graham, your hand is still up. Do you have another comment?
No, it was just I will lower it now, Chairman. Just to say that I know that 3Cs have been working very hard, and I know that our audit team has been looking at the control environment there. But I was a bit concerned about what has been said. And all I'd say now is if I, in my position as chairman of our corporate governance committee, can help promote better working relations, easier, quicker reactions, please let me know, because I'm very happy to try and speed up responses if possible. Okay, I blurred two questions actually, Chairman. I then asked about the reliance on our internal auditors. I don't know if Dan has any comment on that.
Well, to be fair, as I perhaps didn't answer that as eloquently as I could have done. I think my understanding was the scope of the work that we've been asked to do and that we've agreed doesn't cross over. And at this stage, I wouldn't necessarily need to rely on the work of other auditors in informing my opinion on the combined authority. But clearly that comment is welcomed. And if we get to a stage where I do need to consider that, if we cannot conclude this audit satisfactorily, then that may well be an option open to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much, both. Dan, do you have any more to say on this first part, which is your progress report?
No.
And any other comments from colleagues? No. Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's your first year. You started late, but that was because of the process of changing, and it's clearly a learning aspect. But if there's any suggestion as you continue your work that there's some systemic issue about the timing of responses to the information you need, I'm sure you take up individual instances with officers at the time. But please, in your progress report and or your opinion later on, if there's something that we need to know as the audit committee or can help in discussion with officers, please make sure that you include that. Otherwise, we'll put it down to getting used to each other, so to speak. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Appreciate that.
Would you go on to the second half then, which is the future plan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So
Sorry, Chair, I've had my hand up for a little while.
Sorry, how are you, Mark? Sorry.
Sorry, John. Sorry.
No, my fault. Sorry.
It was just a point on that section before we moved on, if I can, just to wrap up.
Yeah,
point.
please do. My fault. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Rather than having a deluge of documentation to read for a meeting in June, if these reports are concluding between now and June, can they be shared with this committee and its membership to read and be ready for June, and maybe even get some questions back to you? That would make a June meeting far more productive than having to fire questions back at you on very recently read documents.
Can I just put some context there? Our practice has always been that if it was satisfactory, or whatever language, I can't remember the RSM description, but if it was satisfactory or better, we wouldn't be we wouldn't ask the report to come to us only in the update a brief insight. It's only when a report is less than satisfactory, partial or worse, that we would get the full report. So I think bearing that in mind, Dan, with your response, I mean, what is your opinion?
There's absolutely no reason, and that either a partial or a no assurance opinion, which, as you say, Chair, is the full that you would receive the full report, but we could absolutely circulate those reports if indeed we have any of that opinion, as and when they're finalised. Absolutely no problem for us to do that through Robert's team if that's agreed today. No problem at all.
Are we comfortable with that, officers?
Yes,
Yes.
we may ask for some confidentiality, obviously, around the usual sensitivities.
Okay.
But I'm sure that could be managed.
Okay. Well, as this is the special end of the first year, let's work on that principle then. If it's partial or no assurance, share the final report with members in advance of the agenda for the meeting. Good, thank you. Sorry I didn't pick you up earlier, Mark. Right, so looking to next year, Daniel.
Yes, thank you. So page 119 and 120, what we've really tried to do there is obviously provide all of the background, and this will be a familiar sort of layout, because obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you only looked at this year's programme some sort of 5 months ago at your November meeting. So we've just continued to sort of update this and provide a little bit more detail, in particular on page 121 of 188. I just wanted to give the committee some reassurance, really, that as John alluded to in his introduction, we had a very, very good level of engagement from the CMT in terms of individual one-on-one meetings to discuss their areas of the risk register, their areas of responsibility, their areas of concern, and or areas where they would just welcome some internal audit coverage to provide assurance on areas of responsibility. So that resulted in a draft programme that was well oversubscribed in terms of a draft 21-22 programme that went to the CMT and has been further prioritised, and that is the plan that you see in front of you today. And in particular, what we are looking at approval for today is pages 122 through to 124, which is, as I say, the internal audit plan. And we've got 3 risk-driven audits from the risk register. So that's the subsidiary company governance, the adult education budget, and the use of data reviews. They're specifically driven and linked to risks on the strategic risk register. We've then also got some suggested coverage around a fraud risk assessment and coverage on HR policies. Obviously, we've not looked at those in any detail as yet. And then we've got the core assurance, which would typically be in a yearly programme, again around the risk management framework and around the key financial controls review. We have seen a number of additional grants awarded in 2021 and potentially 21-22 linked to within the plan, and we've also got a contingency allocation that we've agreed with officers as well. I think the final point that I would just say in relation to the overall plan of work is this is very much to be revisited throughout the year. So whilst you may formally approve the plan today, as new risks emerge and your priorities may change, we can adapt, and this should be an agile programme that we can amend throughout the financial year. But happy to take any questions, Chair, on the plan.
Thank you, Dan. So we're considering the plan at this stage. Are there any? I don't see any hands up. No. Well, I've got a couple of questions. Do you think? I mean, well, a comment first. I'm really encouraged to hear from you that the management team were overburdening you with ideas, because that shows an engagement with internal audit, which is very, very, very positive. My two questions: one is project management. Is there enough in here, remembering that so much of the business of the combined authority is about projects and their management? Do you think we have enough in here to give us those insights?
So I think that's a fair challenge. I think what we can do through the risk management audit, because the first year's risk management audit, and then obviously we're coming on to deliver this follow-up review in April, that will give us the sense that those amendments have been made. We can then do deep dive review through that risk management audit on a couple of specific projects, and so get some assurance through the risk management review that projects continue to be managed effectively. I appreciate you haven't had the final report, but it has been a positive opinion that we have got out in draft at the moment on the work that we've done in this sort of 2021 programme on project management coverage. So we have through the current year, I take your point, Chair, entirely, that we need to ensure that we continue to have enough coverage. I think the other thing that could potentially be used, clearly we can look at something like the use of data. That could potentially cut across projects, as could the fraud risk assessment work. So we've got that opportunity. I also mentioned the contingency budget. If that obviously is there to be utilised if for whatever reason we don't have enough coverage on projects once we've actually done the detailed scopes. I think we've got that ability within year to direct resource to project audit if required.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Yes, and I really would like you to follow up on the points that you've suggested. Now, I've got a second question, but Mike Davey first.
Yeah, forgive me, Chair. It was late. It's to do with the. I really welcome the subsidiary company governance being part of the process, and obviously I do recognise that it's about an audit about how the CA works as opposed to the other way around. But will you have access to the subsidiary government? Because obviously it's about the relationships, because they obviously have to have a comment about how the CPCA work as well. So it's about just if you're able, or is it too early? It may be too early for you to explain, but I'd be interested to know how that will work. Daniel?
No, Councillor, I think it's a really pertinent question, actually, because there have been, and I know it's that the report's been considered by this committee, and members may well be familiar that there have been some public interest reports around some of the sort of wider subsidiary companies that have been set up by local authorities. So I guess a couple of ways of answering this. One is we're currently in discussions with officers around the internal audit arrangements for some of the subsidiary companies, and whether or not RSM may or may not be delivering some of that work. And I think the other point that I would make is that I would expect all of the SLAs that are written with the subsidiary companies, even if RSM were not the subsidiary company auditors, that would allow us access to the information of the subsidiary companies to provide assurance back to this committee and back to officers around the subsidiary company arrangements.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and clearly you'll be able to report back to us if you feel that you've been constrained in reaching a fair opinion.
Indeed.
I'll take my other question now. We've got the next item on the agenda is the adult education budget, but I notice you've got it. So is this proposal to look at the way it is done, or is it to go further, deeper, or duplicate what we're getting next?
No, it's certainly not with a view to a duplication, but what we have had conversations behind the scenes on is the fact that we, alongside, I think, the two firms that were commissioned in this financial year to deliver that work.
Sorry, we've lost you, Daniel. Daniel, we can't hear you. You're frozen. On your behalf, sorry, can you hear me? It's my connection.
We
lost you all there, Daniel, from after the two other firms that were commissioned.
Sorry, so the two other firms that were commissioned that obviously you've got the reports on the agenda today. We are one of the other firms that the ESFA have appointed, so we can undertake the funding audits that both, I think, PwC and Mazars have delivered on behalf of the authority. And I've let my colleagues, my sort of specialist colleagues in that funding team, liaise with officers at CPCA to make them aware of that. And those colleagues are also going to be involved in the scoping discussions for the suggested coverage that we have in the 21-22 programme. It's not intended that this will be a funding audit of one of your providers with this budget. I believe it's going to be a different scope and focus of the review, and therefore there will be no duplication of effort or assurance.
Okay. Well, I understood the words. I'm not sure I understood what they meant in relation to what you're doing versus what the other people are doing. But maybe that's my fault. If you could just make it in the paperwork in future explicit to show that there is this distinction between the two things, that would be very helpful. Sorry if I sounded a bit blunt.
No, we can do exactly that.
Okay, because it did put and perhaps we could do this before we're joined by colleagues for the next item. My eyes watered a bit in the next item where it talked about £30,000 as being the cost of the audit the next item is covering. That just seems, when you think of what the sums that we see around, it seems very high. Is there something peculiarly difficult about these sorts of audits of the education budget?
They are incredibly complex funding rules that are there for whether it's further education, higher education, and private training providers. That they are a complex set of funding rules, and that's why the ESFA. Sorry, I mean, if I'll offer sort of my understanding, and
well, that's why I thought we could discuss it now.
Yes. So it very much is. I mean, just to give you a feel, we've got 220 internal auditors. We've got probably 3 times that number of external auditors, but we've got a separate discrete team that are not either internal or external auditors that deliver funding audits on behalf of our contract with the ESFA. So it is really quite a sort of a niche and specialist area.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more hands up. So we've considered the progress report and made some comments on that. We're considering this draft internal audit plan for the next year. Does it come back to us for final agreement, or is it work in progress? How do we treat it?
I would suggest, Chair, that this is for approval today, if the committee is content to do that, and through our progress reports throughout the year, you have the ability to obviously see any changes that have been requested either through officers and or request any changes yourselves.
Okay, well, that always sharpens up the thinking. So are we happy to approve it today, or do we have any more questions before we approve it? David Brown, are you happy?
Chairman, I'm happy to propose we approve it.
Okay. Right, that's the view of us all then. So we noted the progress report and approved the proposed plan for 21-22. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you.
So if we're happy, we can move on to the next item, which is the adult education budget. And who is introducing? Janet.
Janet, she's just in the meeting now.
Janet, welcome.
Hi, good morning. I hope you've all had an enjoyable and restful Easter break. My name's Janet. I'm the lead commissioner working in the adult education budget team. I'm pleased to be welcomed back to this committee. Thank you, Chair and members. Since I last spoke to you, our 3 education and skills funding agency audits have been well underway. Only one of these audits has completed within the expected timescales. There were no issues with this college provider and no further action is required. The other 2 audits have proved a little more problematic. However, the external auditor advises that he's almost at completion now, and I'm expecting the final reports to arrive in my inbox sometime this week. The audit arrangements for the first academic year of devolved education involve some hand-holding by the Education and Skills Funding Agency. And we are now just beginning year 2 arrangements, which in the main means we are now responsible for auditing all training providers and colleges on the adult education funding stream for the second academic year of devolved delivery and beyond. This means we've needed to put in place arrangements with external audit firms with the relevant experience of the ESFA approach and working papers to carry out our funding audits. We hope that this year's planned audits will start around the end of May, by which time we hope to be able to implement our planned compliance and quality visits with our providers too. Using a risk-based approach, we've identified 4 providers that we wish to put forward for funding audit, and they will be notified in writing shortly. Looking ahead, we intend to audit the remaining providers next year, giving us our full audit baseline. The appointed auditor at this moment in time is Mazars. They work closely with the ESFA and other combined authorities, including Greater London. They are also going to help us prepare our working papers and assurance guidance, updated with their own funding rules, which we shall share with providers to allow for full compliance testing going forwards. And I have also been in conversation with officers at RSM. Many thanks for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Janet. Mark Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Janet. Janet, one very, very tiny little fickle point and one of more interest, really. The fickle point is 2.2. You list Cambridgeshire County Council, West Suffolk Council, TCHC in that order. And then in the next thing, you've got them in a different order. That just threw me for a second. If you could just stick with that, that would help somebody as old as myself just keep abreast of it. That's one moot point. But the middle point there, Cambridgeshire County Council, of which I am a representative member, incomplete due to provided delays. Result is a 3898 overclaim in relation to 9 learners. Could you explain that a little bit more for me, please?
Yep, so I don't have the full report. However, the auditor has indicated of the testing that has taken place, there have been errors for 9 learners, which equate to that amount of funding. So they have effectively overclaimed through one mean or another, and they will need to return that funding to us.
I think the point I'm asking, Janet, is does the audit indicate in any way? I mean, you've used the word errors. I mean, are these just purely mathematical equations of errors? Is there any issue or point of concern? You know, of effectively what I'm reading at what the information we've got at a potential false claim of nearly £4,000.
I suppose just to touch on what Daniel mentioned, these are really complex and data-driven exercises. So in terms of the scale of things, it's not a massive error rate. It has gone above the 5% threshold, which would be considered an error, but it's not of a concern. And Cambridgeshire County Council are a current provider. So if this was not a pandemic year, we would have done the audit within year. So we would have just reduced down and reconciled the provider at the end of the year to sort these things out.
Okay, so the point I want to make there, and just to clarify your answer to my question, this is not a matter of concern. This is a matter that's being reviewed, and there will be an adjustment.
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Graham Bull next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In a previous existence, I was a regional audit manager for the Learning and Skills Council, so I'm very familiar with the adult and further education funding streams. As Janet said, these are incredibly complex, and my team spent 3 or 4 full-time team members spent auditing providers, and a 3,000, 4,000 overclaim is quite trivial, really. It is complex. The only thing I'd say is, Janet, could you, when you give us these figures, could you put it in the light of the contract that we have with the provider, so we can get some sense of the materiality? Because the TCH group 6,900, it may be a mathematical error, it may be it's often a timing error, but it would be helpful to put it into the context of the overall contract. That I think would allow Councillor Goldsack some reassurance about the scale of the error.
That's a really helpful point. Thank you for that, Councillor Bull.
Tony Mason.
I mean, on this part as well, I guess it's I mean, as part of the audit, you've taken a sample, and from that sample, you've identified some errors. It's whether then there is then an extrapolation of that sample to get what a potential total error rate would be, because it may be that in the sample you've identified 7,000 or 4,000 as an error, but actually if you've only sampled 20% of the claims, are you going to extrapolate that out to the full sample size?
Those words sound right, Councillor Mason. I would have to defer back to the full report when it arrives.
Okay.
It has all been tested and retested again from the resubmitted ILR, so the errors that were picked up during the first sampling would have had to have been repopulated and retested by the external auditors. So I'd be happy to come back to you outside of this meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. Okay. Thank you, Janet, and for answering so clearly. So we're to note the report. And what happens to it next, or is this its final destination?
I believe this is the final destination, Chair. I think the decision is just to note the update for yourselves.
Okay, and when do we get the next? See it? When do we see it again? Because I know this is part of our routine oversight. When is the next time you'll have to face us?
I'm happy to come whenever you like, Chair. I could provide an update at the next meeting if you wish.
No, it wasn't that so much. But when is the next update due? Mike Davey, you wanted to say something.
I mean, I suppose isn't there a slight problem, Chair, in that the reports, 2 of the 3 reports are incomplete. And I think, doesn't it need to come back for formal sign off? That doesn't need to be a major exercise, but I think it feels a bit odd not having a final oversight, particularly on the basis of Councillor Mason's point, because if they're going to resample the bits that haven't, it's about knowing how it concludes, I think. So without labouring the point, I think I'd feel more comfortable if it came back, even if it was just in a note saying that the audits were complete and no oversights were found. And
when would the timing be for that, Janet, do you think?
I've been advised that the reports are coming in this week, Chair. Those amounts are very unlikely to change. They're the final amounts. Just to give you an idea, Cambridgeshire County Council, we fund in the region of £2 million. So it is a small error rate and will just be reduced off of their next grant payment.
It's like, sorry, Chair, to come back, like Councillor Bull, I also have a background in adult education from a different perspective. So I'm aware of the contextual. I think the contextual numbers are really important, but that makes it, oddly enough, all the more important that it comes back to us for final sign-off.
So June is a reasonable aiming date, subject to agenda management. Okay, well, let's do that. And when you bring the next report, could you give us some insight to the value for money of this process? Because it doesn't seem, it's £11 million, I think we're talking about here, and it's £30,000 to have it audited. I'd like to understand a little bit about the rhythm of audit and whether the process is worth the money that's spent, and how you measure it or indicate it or take a view on that. That would be very helpful. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be very happy to do that.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Janet, for coming.
Thank
we
you.
Look forward to seeing you next time. Right. That takes us to item 9, which is me, which is our annual report to the Combined Authority Board. We've done better this year, or I've done better this year, because we've got it in the right time cycle. So we're just coming to the end of the municipal year, and so it's timely to do it now rather than next month, or the next meeting, which has been what we've done hitherto. I think I'd just like to make the point, we've benefited, it seems to me that we as a committee have benefited from 2 years now with one change, the same people. And I think that has enabled us to be more effective. But I also realise that we're about to, with the elections coming and whatever will follow from that in the sense of how people are distributed to committees, that we might have a different mixture of personalities next year. I would only ask that if you have any choice in the matter and you can stomach it, then you come back and continue to contribute in the way that you've done to now. Because it's, having been on this journey from day one, it is really comforting to see the engagement that we now have as a group and the knowledge that we've built up. So the report is in a format which lays on the record what we've done. And I'd be grateful for any comments on that. But what I've tried to do in the forward was just in the bullet points on page, I can never sure what page we're on, but it's on the first, on what page, 148. I came to my mind, it would be, because I always say when I go to the Combined Authority Board that this is pretty dry stuff, because we're about the making sure all the parts of the organisation are working properly, and it's not always exciting. So I was trying to get in the mind of the reader in the bullet points in my introduction or forward, what I distilled as the sort of characteristics of what we are. That I think we have benefited from virtual meetings in a way, and particularly on the ease in which it makes it people to attend, and which has allowed us to do those extra meetings in the year in a way which would have been hard to do physically. So I do hope we don't lose that option of physical meetings in future. Stable membership with new colleagues on internal audit, good support and open support from officers. I think it is very important that the Mayor attends when we ask him to. And so far, everything that we've put in the form of recommendations has been accepted by the board, which is also a good indicator of the significance that's taken of the Audit Governance Committee. And I see that when I was writing this, I see there are no material concerns to draw to the attention of the Combined Authority Board. So those points plus any others, I just want to be comfortable that we think they're fair, and then any other comments you've got on the report or that you'd like to raise. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies for not noticing it earlier. I've just noticed that actually we've got the wrong year on that page you've just been referring to, because we title it as Annual Report 2019-20.
It's so nice to have you.
2021.
We will do that. I see the plan. Sorry, where was this?
That page you've just been referring to with the foreword.
The annual report for 2021.
At the very top of the page, it says Annual Report 2019-2020.
Oh, does it? Okay, all right. It is very good to have you. Nick?
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive report, and I just got one query in the section on the governance of the Combined Authority. It goes through each of the meetings and says what actions were decided. With the previous meeting on the 5th of March 2021, under assurance framework, it says the committee received the report. The committee actually made what I thought was a very significant recommendation about the business board meeting in public, which the Combined Authority has now, which the Combined Authority board has now agreed to. So wouldn't it be good to sort of have that recorded in the report?
I should have this at my fingertips. What page are you on?
I'm working to page. I'm looking at a different version. It's actually page 7 of the report. Yeah. It's under the governance, and it goes through listing each of the meetings.
Yep. Okay. We'll do that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Anything else? Okay. Well, look, thank you very much. And on that basis, then I will put, with that one change or two changes, editorial and substance, I'll put that to the Combined Authority Board for its next meeting. Okay, and thank you again for all the support you've given the committee in the last year or so. And then that brings us to item 10, which is the work programme, which is really the record rather than what lies ahead. And Anne, I thought we had what lies ahead as well. Don't we have a sort of annual schedule?
Yeah, that should be included within that. I think we've got the work programme of what has been, and then after that there is the work programme for the following year. Should be in there.
Okay, can I not go down far enough?
Let me just check what page. So yeah, page 171.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments on the work programme, or are we happy to accept it? Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It really is reference to what you've just said about the membership of the committee. I think it might be worth post the elections having a review of if the committee membership remains the same, then so be it. But if it changes, then it might be worth having a little review post the elections.
Review of
the work programme.
Okay, right. Okay, yes, indeed, right. And is there any? Nick Sanford, did you have a point?
Yeah, just a question really, because I almost got caught out by this meeting being on a Tuesday because I've been used to them being on Fridays. Is it are sort of all future meetings going to be on Friday days?
Yeah, most our meetings will usually be on a Friday. It was just because of the bank holiday weekend. it fell on the Tuesday this time.
All right. Well, thank you. That brings us to a close. The next meeting, although it said on the agenda, is virtual, as we heard from Kim at the beginning. Will probably not be, so we'll wait to see where we have to convene if we can't do it over here. And whatever happens to, well, I hope you're all going to be pretty busy, I imagine, in the next, as councillors in the next few weeks with the May elections. And I look forward to seeing some or all of you afterwards. Thanks very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.